Claire's Last Supper, the Charleston Plantation Poisoning of 1858.
I hope no one finds out what we are cooking.
The candles flickered against the heavy wood of the plantation dining room, shadows stretching long across silver platters and goblets of imported wine. It was a feast meant to display wealth, power, and control, but hidden beneath the roasted meats, the sugared fruits, and the carefully poured cups was death itself. The guests gathered that night had no idea their final meal had already been decided for them, not by the plantation master, not by the mistress of the house, but by someone they never truly saw. Someone forced into silence, someone stripped of freedom, someone who had been listening, waiting, watching. The year was 1858, deep in the South Carolina Low Country, where Charleston's plantation aristocracy flaunted its riches on the backs of enslaved labor. And while the city celebrated its booming rice fortunes, whispers of rebellion, resistance, and revenge were growing louder just beyond the candlelight. By the time the last toast was raised, the poison had already entered their veins. But what drove an enslaved woman known in fragments of history as Clara to commit an act so daring, so final, that it shook the plantation world to its core? Was it desperation, justice, or something darker still? Tonight we peel back the silken veil of Charleston's so-called grace to uncover the true cost of power, and the Last Supper no one would ever forget. Charleston in the 1850s was a city of contradictions. Its streets bustled with polished carriages, fine gowns, and imported luxuries. Yet just beyond the gaslit glow, the rice plantations sprawled, swamps where enslaved Africans and their descendants labored under brutal, disease-ridden conditions. Rice, called Carolina gold, was the lifeblood of Charleston's elite. It lined their pockets, funded their balls, and filled their lavish dining tables. Among these plantations stood one notorious estate on the outskirts of the Ashley River. Its owner, a man of status and cruelty, ruled his lands with iron precision. His dinners were the stuff of spectacle. Ornate gatherings meant not only to impress but to remind all who entered of his dominance. Into this world moved Clara. Records of her birth and life are scarce, as they are for so many enslaved women, but the fragments that survive suggest a figure of resilience and quiet defiance. Forced into domestic service, Clara's days were spent in the kitchen, sweat, fire, and endless labor under the watch of a mistress whose cruelty rivaled her husband's. The kitchen was a world of secrets. While the family feasted, Clara and others labored in the heat unnoticed, unthanked. But with proximity came opportunity. She knew the master's tastes, the family's habits, the wines that never ran dry. And she also knew the herbs and powders, some that could heal, others that could kill. In 1858, tensions in Charleston were high. Fear of insurrection haunted white families. Just decades earlier, Denmark Vesey's thwarted revolt had shaken the city to its core. Whispers of resistance still circulated in the quarters, passed from mouth to mouth under the cover of night. For the enslaved, freedom seemed impossibly distant. And yet, in moments of unbearable cruelty, vengeance could take root. That year, in a house glittering with wealth but rotting with cruelty, Clara began preparing the supper that would make history. But what the family thought was just another night of indulgence would become their final feast. The plantation's days followed a punishing rhythm. Dawn broke with the sound of overseers' whips cracking through rice fields. Inside the house, Clara's duties began with fire, stoking the kitchen hearth, boiling water, preparing breads, and roasting meats that would never touch her lips. The mistress of the house was known for her sharp tongue, her punishments swift and humiliating. She demanded perfection in every dish, and any mistake meant blows, hunger, or worse. The master, meanwhile, carried himself with the arrogance of unchecked power. He reminded Clara and the others daily that they were property, not people. But cruelty has a way of planting seeds. Every insult, every slap, every reminder of ownership fed something in Clara. Perhaps it began as quiet resentment. Perhaps it hardened into resolve. The opportunity came with the planning of a grand supper. Guests from Charleston, neighboring planters, and even local officials would attend. It was meant to showcase the plantation's wealth at the height of rice season. The kitchen roared with preparation: turkeys stuffed and roasted, sweet puddings baked, wines uncorked. And there, among the spices and herbs, Claire found her weapon. Some accounts suggest arsenic, stolen from rat poison kept in storage. Others whisper of native plants, crushed and brewed into a tasteless powder. Whatever the source, it was potent and deadly. As the day turned to dusk, carriages began arriving. Laughter echoed through the halls as silk gowns brushed polished floors. In the kitchen, Claire stirred, poured, and plated with practiced precision. To the untrained eye, she was invisible. To those who noticed, she was simply the help. But each goblet she filled, each dish she carried forward, carried with it the weight of her decision. And as the plantation's elite raised their glasses, none of them knew they were toasting their own destruction. But by morning, the house would fall silent in a way it never had before. The supper began as all the others had. Silver clattered. Voices overlapped in laughter. The master presided at the head of the table, his wife at his side, their guests, glowing with satisfaction as the courses rolled out. The first signs were subtle. A guest complained of sudden nausea. Another clutched their stomach with a frown. The mistress dismissed it as indigestion. But within minutes, the laughter faltered. Wine goblets trembled in hands that could no longer steady themselves. Panic spread like fire through the room. Chairs scraped against wood as guests staggered to their feet, faces pale, lips trembling. Some collapsed outright, their bodies convulsing as the poison coursed through them. The master shouted orders, his voice cracking, not with authority but with terror. Claire watched from the shadows of the kitchen door. She had fed them their own cruelty, spoonful by spoonful, cup by cup. The dining room, once a stage of aristocratic confidence, dissolved into chaos. Guests vomited onto the polished floors, clawing at their throats. The mistress shrieked as her gown soaked in spilled wine and bile. Servants rushed, some genuinely panicked, others frozen in shock. But there was no cure, no antidote, no saving the evening. The poison was already inside them, relentless and merciless. By midnight, the plantation house was unrecognizable. Where once music and chatter had filled the halls, silence reigned, broken only by the moans of the dying. And in that silence stood Claire, a woman history barely recorded, yet who carved her name into the unspoken ledger of resistance in the most final way possible. This was not a supper. It was a reckoning. Morning revealed the horror. The once proud plantation stood like a mausoleum, its wealth scattered across a dining room that smelled of death. Neighbors arrived, drawn by rumor, only to find lifeless bodies draped across chairs and floors. Claire's fate, like much of her life, is unclear. Some accounts suggest she was immediately seized, tortured, and executed, her act buried under layers of silence by a society desperate to erase any hint of rebellion. Others whisper that she slipped away into the swamps, vanishing like so many freedom seekers before her. The truth may never be known. What is certain is the ripple her act left behind. Charleston's elite, already fearful of insurrection, tightened their grip. Laws against enslaved gatherings grew harsher, punishments more severe. Fear coursed through the veins of the city's white population. If an enslaved woman could infiltrate their tables and turn luxury into death, then nowhere was truly safe. And yet for those in bondage, Claire's act became something else. A whisper of resistance, proof that power could be challenged even in the heart of the plantation household. It was not a victory in the traditional sense, too much blood, too much pain, but it was a message carved in silence. Even the enslaved had the power to strike back. The Charleston Plantation Poisoning of 1858 remains largely absent from textbooks, its details blurred by time and suppression, but the questions it raises still burn. What is justice in a world built on cruelty? When stripped of every human right, what choices remain? Was Claire's supper an act of vengeance, Or was it the first shot in a war no one wanted to name?